Welcome to Resilient Foundations. Hi, I'm Rebecca Plantz, and today we're going to talk about a real-life case study of a situation that impacted a lot of companies all around the world, and we're going to focus on something called vendor risk or third-party risk, as well as understanding your dependencies in your business so that if you have problems, you can very quickly get things back up and running. The first thing we're going to say is this was a Wall Street Journal moment. You don't ever want to be on a Wall Street Journal moment where you have impacted things so much, impacted customers, caused reputational issues or whatnot. You don't want that because if you're on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, it's never a good moment for an executive. In this case, Amazon Web Services, or AWS, as many of you may know it, took down for 13 hours many big companies and even a lot of small companies. What happened was they made a network change that very quickly proliferated, a bad network change, by the way, that very quickly proliferated through their whole ecosystem. And the ripple effect of that change is what actually kept them down for that full time, trying to recover all of those dependencies and get all of the things in the rows all back up and running. The original root cause issue, the change that caused this originally, was remediated actually very quickly. It was all of the dependencies inside of the technology that other companies relied on or that the internal services within AWS relied on that took the length of time to actually restore them one by one. So the quick summary here from Wall Street Journal is they had this internet outage for 13 hours. The outage was caused by a technical update, which started with, I said, a DNS change, and it affected a major database system. So this database system is heavily used. It's a very critical system for a lot of companies inside of AWS. And downstream, it affected 113 AWS services and internal sites and apps. Now, again, 113 does not sound that great for a company and a data center operation of this size. The number of companies that relied on this whole chain of services in the database is where the real impact in the Wall Street Journal moment came up. So cloud providers, third-party providers, generally, it's super important to really know who are the suppliers you rely on. A lot of companies use third parties now. They can use them for people, they can use them to run their processes, and they can use them to run their technologies. And you need to look at all three of those spaces and ask yourself, how many third parties am I relying on in my business? And what criticality do they have to keeping my operation up and running? How could they impact my revenue? How could they impact my sales? How could they impact my customer experience? How could they impact just my internal operations? So where these vendors become really critical is if you have things that have to stay up. Let me give you an example. You have a call center operation. That's primarily a people vendor or a third-party vendor for you. Most of the time, it's a call center with people answering tickets and things like that. In that case, a bigger company probably is going to have that be what we call a tier 1 or maybe even a tier 0 supplier, because they need that to be up and available pretty much 24/7 for the multinational companies. But even a large, national company is still going to want really good service hours. So customers can call in around business plus time on each end. So you're going to want to think about, what do these vendors provide to me in my business? How critical is it that these operational or these third parties stay up and running? We call that uptime or availability. And then how fast, if they do have an issue, what is their recovery time? How fast can they get back online? So what is your recovery time objective? If you have, for example, you want your sales to be running 24/7, then you may have a pretty high uptime because it's revenue loss for your website, for example. The more critical the operation, the more critical the function, the lower time to recover you should have. So like a tier 0, maybe 15 minutes. You might need things back up and running in 15 minutes. So in this case, most companies would say, AWS, especially if they're technology-based companies, they have a lot of online presence, for example. They would say 13 hours is way past a recovery time objective to be basically back up and running. And a degraded service can be as impactful as a full outage sometimes. So what is your recovery time for a degraded service? And then the second thing I think is important to think about in this situation is not only your third-party vendors, and we'll talk about how to select them and what things you want to be thinking about when you select your vendors, but also their dependencies. Where are they creating dependencies in your business? And how do they have linked dependencies to other things? So in this case, the dependencies internal to the operation at Amazon, you could see it was 113 services and apps that were down as a result of the database being down. And that database being down was a result of a DNS change at the network level. So one change rippled throughout the entire infrastructure and impacted customers far more significantly than you might otherwise think. Okay, let's talk about how you select a third-party vendor. So a third-party vendor or a third-party supplier, you might call them. That is one of the situations where more and more companies are going to outsourcing. They outsource a lot of their people, a lot of their processes, a lot of their technology. Most companies today use, for example, some kind of a SaaS technology or a cloud provider. When you have that, you want to be thinking about in the contracts, what commitment are they making to what we call uptime or availability? What commitment are they taking to recovery time objectives? How fast will they get up and running for you? If I take an outage, what's the commitment? And oh, by the way, what happens if they don't meet those two service level agreements? Is there some kind of a compensation to you for any revenue lost or any sales lost, for example, or costs that you had to incur to keep your operation up and running? Vendors, you want to make sure you understand in those contracts what those terms and conditions are and put those clauses in if those clauses currently don't exist. That way you're protected on some front if they don't meet those. A lot of companies do have these as standard clauses, but if they don't, again, make sure you can get some commitment around that, even if it's an addendum or your own contract relationship with them on service level agreements for uptime or availability, recovery time if they do have an issue. The third party risk is also exacerbated in today's world because your third party supplier have their own third party suppliers. So you're into then fourth party risk. They will have their own third party suppliers. Then you're into fifth party risk. It becomes a dependency chain throughout a whole ecosystem, especially in the technology space. And even if you're doing like operational services like a call center, for example, they have their own interdependencies with other contracting firms, with their own technology providers, etc. So that third party, fourth party, fifth party risk, you can sometimes get to fourth party risk in conversations. So when you're looking at third parties, always ask them, who are your third parties that are mission critical providers? What I would call a tier 1 or a tier 2. Some companies call it a tier 0 even, or a tier 1. Like AWS for most companies, if you have a strong online presence, is probably a tier 0 provider for you. Or any cloud provider that provides a key service or technology that if it goes down or has a major type of degraded service or disruption, you know that you are protected in some way in their own uptime, and you know where that critical impact will occur in your own business if they go down. You can always talk about workaround processes, but if you start with looking at your third-party suppliers more closely for these kinds of things, you are going to better protect yourself on the front end for any kinds of those disruptions. Okay, so we've talked about third-party, fourth-party risk. Now let's also talk about dependencies. When we think of dependencies, we want to think people, process, and technology. You will have people dependencies, like a team might be fully co-located that in one area and they run a critical process for the company. Great example would be, I have a network operations center or I have a security operations center. These teams tend to be 24/7. They can, because they're monitoring. They're monitoring site uptime. They're monitoring cybersecurity activity. They're looking at alerts or things like that as it goes. Now, more and more is being AI driven, of course, but even there, you're still having a lot of false positives, and you're going to need people who still monitor the monitors and can see when something's really a false alert versus a real situation going on, and then can ring the bell or do whatever they need to do. A great example of this kind of dependency was a few years ago, 10 years ago, I guess it was, there was a major flood in India. And we had a security operations team that was located in that facility that was significantly flooded. I mean, it was huge, huge floods. The whole region was disrupted. And so we had to make a decision in order to keep a 24/7 operation going. The people themselves were disrupted. So those teams that were local there that took one full part of the shift, that was a worldwide shift where we went from region to region to region over 24/7, the folks that were in that particular location couldn't work. So we had to make a decision. Do we take them and relocate them a few hours away and find a temporary facility for them where they could set up shop and actually get back to work? We did do that because that particular operation was so mission critical to the company and protecting customers that the company chose to, yes, we're going to move the group out of that flooded area into a safer location and set up in a temporary shop. The issue around that also was their families are also affected. So yes, you could move the workers and get them to a place where they can be effective, but they're not going to be effective if their families are in trouble, if they're worried about, their parents, their kids, their spouses, their siblings, whatever. So you had to make a decision there as well of, are they going to relocate because they're taking care of family members? And if they are willing to relocate, do you also then need to take the family members with them so that they don't have to worry and they can focus on the job? You have to think very holistically in some of these situations so that your people are able to focus if you do need to relocate them to a different temporary spot. So that's a people type of dependency. When you have critical function, critical people, they're in a location that's impacted as an example, and then you need to figure out if you're just going to stand down that part of the operation, relocate people, or some other way that you're going to work around that. Again, if that's a vendor, you need to ask those questions about where are your teams located so that if they have a disruption, you know if the service is going to be disrupted. Another important example might be we had a team at another company located the Ukraine in the Crimean situation. And they ran a full set of technology and a full set of processes that no one else in the company knew. So when that impact happened, that whole function was down until we could train people, get access to systems and things like that to get that back up and running. So co-location is great for things like building teamwork and having people work effectively and getting to know each other and have the water cooler or the hallway conversations to keep work moving forward. The downside risk is resiliency, in that if that location goes down, then you've got to worry about how you're going to back up that function and make sure you can move that function to another part of the country or the world, whatever your case may be. In thinking about that with your vendors, if, for example, they're in a high risk area, and risk could be anything like natural disasters. For example, in the Philippines, you get a lot of typhoons and things like that going through there. Great location, for example, for call center. It can have a lot of weather impacts. Do you have a backup service provider if that location goes down, as an example? People process. People work in process, but also technology works in process. Understanding what processes in your company are mission critical so that you can say these people or this technology support those processes. That's how you start to break down your dependency patterns. The technology itself is a key dependency where you need uptime and you need to understand what that does for you. I'll give you an example of recovery time. Payroll. If you have a product that runs payroll, if you have a 2-week cycle on your payroll, and that technology, it's a cloud provider or a third-party provider of some sort, If that goes down at the beginning of your pay cycle, you might have a week or so for that to come up. If it goes down the day before or the day of your pay cycle, you're going to need immediate uptime. So your recovery time could actually vary based on your operational requirements. So go to your highest requirement. If it is, I need to have this back up in 24 hours. In my worst case scenario, I'm at the end of my pay period and I have to pay employees, then make sure it's 24 hours, that you're not holding funds for more than that. You don't want to miss a payroll if you can help it, for example. So even those internal processes, don't just always think about customer processes. Think about internal processes as well that just are the back office of your operation. And again, look at your fourth party risk. Make sure you know who your vendors are also using for third parties so that you can see that whole dependency chain in action and map all of those things into keeping your operation up, keeping it safe, keeping your people healthy and well, and moving the business forward. I hope this was helpful. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this channel, and we look forward to seeing you on our website at resilientfoundations.com.